Is 2025 shaping up to be a real life movie, a disaster movie? Disaster movies are almost as old as film itself, and movies like Armageddon, Twister, Don't Look Up, World War Z, and others have played out scenarios that cover a wide spectrum of catastrophes, from the climate to the impact of wars and the spread of deadly viruses. This year, we've already seen wildfires break out in California, a deadly terror attack in New Orleans, and President-elect Trump is ushering in a new period of uncertainty at home and abroad. And as always, there is a real global and Greek as well angle to dig into here. Pulling up my first guest, Katerina Dimitratos, the images coming out of California are particularly devastating now and remind me of some of the worst images that we've seen from Greek wildfires. With the climate agenda taking a back seat as an issue now with this incoming administration, since we mentioned Trump, is this a disaster movie in the making or no?
I think it is. We have to remember, let's focus on California for a minute because that situation is ongoing. 5,000 acres have currently burned. 37,000 people have evacuated. The fire still isn't contained. And we're still questioning, was it started due to the climate, an accident? Was it intentionally set? That is all under investigation right now. But I think climate has definitely exacerbated the situation, particularly the weather right now in California. And I want to flag for everyone, burning trees emit the carbon dioxide that they once captured back into the environment. So this is really a critical situation to monitor in California and around the world, like in Greece.
I want to tag George in here now and expand our discussion here on climate. You're our emergency response expert here, George. Is this more about a lack of preparedness, or which would make a much less interesting disaster film, I think, or are we watching something unfold that's really beyond our control at this point?
I think it's a combination of both. I think that we're probably chasing the climate circumstances. There are elements of disasters that it's all about preservation of life and risk mitigation. And I think what you're seeing in Los Angeles is exactly that, where right now it's preservation of life and understanding that you really can't overcome the winds that are taking place in Los Angeles, similar to some of the things that are happening, in Greece. And I think in this particular circumstance, because it's so close and inside LA and the devastation is something that we're seeing and impacting human lives, is why it's brought the global attention it has.
Endy, tagging you in, while this year looks like it'll be this disaster movie for the climate, can countries like Greece, since George brought up Greece, really set an example here and step up and show that you can change this narrative? I think Greece had, let's be honest, last year, there were some superhuman efforts to protect human life and the environment.
Yeah, but beyond what countries can do, let's everybody, since we're in New Year resolutions, let's remember Greece's worst wildfire that we remember was because somebody was burning brush on his property in a high wind day. You driving in Greece and you see municipalities let brush grow all the way up to the edge of the highway. Think about what you can do as well. To all our listeners, the life you may be saving is your own. That's to start with. And everybody can play it, but they got to invest in it. George will probably answer this better than any of us here, but I think there's a lot of tabletop exercises. And when we have a disaster, people say, let's prevent the next disaster. But are they really putting forth the investments in it? This is something I keep hearing about, AI being able to do a lot more, and drones and all of this. But every time I hear we have a better strategy against wildfires, then we get wildfires in January. Guys. Of course, since I keep playing HBO Max behind me, that's not a product placement. They're not a sponsor of Thanos, not yet. But you can go watch Lord of the Rings, Two Towers, and I'm just going to blame Saruman for burning trees in California.
George, your tag now again. are we doing enough here? You know, Endy mentioned that you could tell us more about this in detail, but you know, are the right steps being taken even after all these reports come out every year? We hear, oh, here's the blueprint on how to handle this issue, and then again, there's wildfires.
Yeah, it's tough to follow Endy and Styroman, but you know, I think that Endy was actually
Saruman.
I'm sorry.
Come on, you're speaking like Grima Wormtongue now.
But the reality is that investment in preparedness is something that is not sexy in administrations, right? It's it's not something that grabs votes. Although I do think in Greece over the last 3 to 5 years it actually has. It's not that long ago that Greece implemented an SMS system, an emergency communication system. It's hard to imagine that didn't exist up until 3-4 years ago, and they've needed it. It has saved lives. And it was just a couple of weeks ago that they had floods in the city of Athens. So the reality is investment means a lot. It means not only from first responders, personnel, drones, personal and individual responsibility, right? If you see something, you have to say something early on so that you can respond. But the reality is that there's going to be man-made disasters. There's going to be environmental disasters. These things are going to occur. Ultimately, you want no one to lose their life from this, and those things that are replaceable, you replace. To Katerina's point is, what are we doing to the climate, though, when all of these things happen?
But real hat tip, again, following up on George, a hat tip to this government, the Mitsotakis government and Minister Kikilias, because you saw this summer that they managed circulation. People, it wasn't like in years past where you heard about people driving right into the fire, or these horrific images of a mom hugging her kids like they're burned, they're charged.
In the middle of the thalassa.
Whereas in LA, you're reading this morning that the cops are trying to get people out of their cars, that they were driving into bottlenecks. And I think that the Greeks, with the effective way they managed COVID circulation, or how people could move in around COVID, they've learned some things. Years past, it was the California fire brigades going to Greece to teach, but I think Greece's ministry and their digital stuff, I think they could teach us something about how you manage circulation, because no matter what it is, here in Chicago, DC had 3 inches of snow and DC shut down. We see what happens when snow hits here. Everybody becomes
I see Katerina nodding. I want to pull her into the discussion here. Katerina, what's your take?
I agree. I think this is a human man-made problem, right? Everything regarding the climate boils down to humans. But I think coming from a nonprofit background and working in a sustainability focused organization, I'll say there are people that care about the climate and there are people that don't. And we need to be realistic about it and provide incentives for the people that don't. I think a little bit different, but a great example is the congestion pricing in New York. That regulation worked. We've seen a reduction in cars entering Manhattan. Similar regulation around climate incentives that include incentives and penalties can also help persuade people that don't necessarily care about the climate. They should, but if they don't, get them more involved and convince them to make appropriate changes, firstly. Secondly, to Endy's point about Greece, we need that education and training in the US. That isn't something I think available right now, or it is, but it's just not of interest to the general public and not pushed by our different governments, and it needs to be.
George, I wanted to switch from the climate to another major and I think terrible incident that took place as we stepped into 2025, and that was the deadly terrorist attack in New Orleans. Since 9/11, I think we've all lived with this fear. We've all had, there's been TV shows, there's been movies that have covered various scenarios that are similar to this. But would you agree that this is a disaster movie in and of itself?
Well, I think, Thano, since 9/11, things have changed in the United States, from recognizing that large-scale events are targets and functioning as an incident command approach from the local municipality, depending on the magnitude of the event. I think what happened in New Orleans is, there are, several flaws. Probably the biggest was their communications. I think their crisis communications was something that in 2025 you would not expect to deviate from really good communications. But the reality is we have examples, and until something happens to you, you don't prepare. The bombing in the France-Germany game, during a national team game, concerts, all of these are.
Interruption here, but
this is why HALC is in fourth place.
So, all of these are examples of why you implement the security measures that you put in place. In New Orleans, quite frankly, without knowing all the details, you're hearing that some of the barricades weren't there because they were waiting for the Super Bowl. But across every city, New Year's Eve, even in Chicago, is a date that's on the calendar for first responders, for the Office of Emergency Management. And that is one where, everything is activated. So I think we're going to learn more about that. And the last thing I would say is we should expect more lone wolf kind of events in 2025.
Katerina, you grew up in New Jersey, and I think 9/11 is one of the events that really it was a major, major event for, all of us that remembered it, but particularly something that, was just across from where you grew up. How did this incident that, kicked off 2025 impact you?
It raised a lot of questions. I think for me, I was questioning, firstly, what motivates someone, particularly someone in the US military, who would be patriotic, love our country, our people, fight for it, to kind of pivot and become a supporter of a terrorist organization and harm other Americans. That was the first question. Second question is, what have we done since 9/11? What improvements are there? Do we feel safer? I don't. I was a freshman in high school during 9/11, right? I remember seeing smoke from the Twin Towers across the street from my house. I live in New Jersey across the Hudson, but that was the impact. You would look up at the sky for days and still see the smoke from the towers. I was just questioning, what have we done? And I don't have an answer for that, really.
We've done a lot, actually. We've done a lot. Think about this. There's going to be a lot of people watching this who probably haven't gotten their real ID yet. So the real ID is about us being safer when we get in the skies. There was an article the other day about facial recognition at the airports. And look, there's a lot more investments we got to have in law enforcement, but you can track somebody on cameras and crime carjackings. You know exactly what route people are taking when they're getting away. Now, we're not catching them for other reasons, but I think we've done a lot. The one thing we haven't done, that there is a sensitivity that existed even after 9/11. Mm-hmm. And if you remember 9/11, there was all this sensitivity to make sure we weren't profiling especially Muslims, because we were profiling Muslims, we were profiling Sikhs who were not Muslims, right? And you had these ridiculous shows of like, we'll search an old yaya at the airport as frequently as we'll search somebody who reaches a profile of the 9/11 bombers. And going back to what our grandparents taught us, maybe you got a profile. I know it's not going to be a politically correct thing to say that you got a profile, but I'll tell you what, neither this guy nor the 9/11 bombers, nor the people who are going to bomb Taylor Swift's concert that they caught in Austria, none of them are coming to your Vasilopita next week, guys.
Yeah, but you know what, Endy? One of the things,
some of them may hang out when Thanos plays Bouzoukia at Taksim, but anyway, that's
many of our listeners never even experienced 9/11, right? Or were too young to remember 9/11. Coming out of 9/11, if you ask this question, most of if you polled individuals in the United States, they would say absolutely profile, right? And we're in a state right now where there's these sensitivities, and again, it comes down to risk mitigation, right? What are we willing to do as a country to protect our citizens? Because now, as you're unraveling everything about this individual, everyone's like, how did we miss it? Well, we miss it.
And profiling doesn't necessarily mean discriminate against. People will say profiling is necessarily discriminatory, but okay, we have to get 2-3 steps ahead of people, because to read stories and listen to podcasts of people who then profile this terrorist in New Orleans after the fact, and you're like, oh, what, man, there were a lot of red flags there. How didn't you catch it? Well, because we're not profiling.
I want to pull up an image that we've got and pivot a little bit to a quick caption contest that, something that we did in our first episode. And as you can see here, we've got President Trump at his latest presser that made a lot of headlines and drew a lot of reactions from international heads of state as well, where, not only did he talk about annexing Greenland and Canada, he also spoke about criticized President Carter as his remains were being, moved, and he threatened to escalate against Hamas. Endy, since we're on this theme of disasters, is this, well, before we get into the question, first, let's get your take on, what kind of caption you would put to this story, and then we'll move on.
Can I do the shrug like this? Like the shrug emoji? I mean, it's what it is, a shrug emoji. I actually think he's trying to make out the Hayek symbol behind George's head. That's all. He's like, make Hagia Sophia great again. That's my caption. I don't know if you want an answer to some other question, but the shrug.
We'll get to that. But let's run through our captions here. Katerina?
Where's Elon, our shadow president?
Ooh.
Nice. That's a good one. George?
I like his tan. You can tell that, he's been in Mar-a-Lago for a long period of time.
So he's worried about heading to Washington, where he might not be as in the sun as he has been in Florida.
Correct.
But
he'll get the tan no matter where he's at.
This raises a bigger question, though, and it goes back to our disaster movie theme, because we've seen Trump now pick fights with U.S. allies. We're seeing what seems to be a showdown in the Republican camp between the MAGA core and the tech bros and Elon Musk. And is the stage set for political disaster, both at home and abroad?
Yes, because there's going to be so much chaos that, George started with his analysis about New Orleans, about with the system not working, even though it was in place. And when there's chaos, that's when bad guys take advantage. And we could use this analogy in a million different ways. Since we're entering the NFL playoff season, the best teams are the ones that make the most of another team's turnovers. I think we are turnover susceptible over the next year. And it's not because of a particular political ideology. Some people may argue with me and say it is because of it, but I don't think so. I think it's because you have a lot of people coming in. Since Katerina referenced Elon Musk, we could talk about Robert Kennedy. You have a lot of people coming in with the intent to have war with the system. Now, that's fine if you can keep making the system continue its core tasks. If the head of Homeland Security is going to be prioritizing mass deportations over actual Homeland Security, like, are we protecting the homeland? What's that going to look like for our preparedness? We don't have an unlimited budget. We saw, and we're seeing this in the tensions even within the Republican Party. Where's the spending going to come from? Everything that the president wants to do is going to cost money. Mass deportations are going to cost money. Taking control of Greenland is going to certainly cost money. Taking control of the Panama Canal is going to cost money. Tax cuts are going to cost money. we're going to see pretty soon in his first budget what's being prioritized. But that chaos, that is inevitable in terms of any transition. But with this transition, with this president and these department heads, it's going to be very chaotic and kind of on the world stage. I still don't know what the vision is, right? The America First crowd was not happy, for example, with Marco Rubio being Secretary of State. But then there's all these special envoys, and I don't know what they're doing compared or who they're answering to. Are they answering to Marco Rubio? So will there be a chaos in terms of American foreign policy, and who is going to take advantage of that chaos?
Well, Katerina, you brought up, Elon as this shadow president, and let's dig into this Elon question a little bit. How do you see his role in this new incoming presidency?
I think that's a great question, and still is a question. I think we haven't had. It's unprecedented to have someone be the best friend of the president or cling to him and be in that shadow president capacity. And the question is, when does Trump get annoyed with Elon and push him away? Or does Elon manage to kind of stick through Trump's presidency and influence the administration? I think there's still a question there. I think it won't be clear for another few months. From the business side, I've seen this impacting various companies where they aren't really making any definitive moves right now, where they would be in a typical January, right? They'd be setting new budgets, making new plans and roadmaps for the new year, and they're kind of treading water, waiting to see what this administration is going to do first. So I expect probably Q2 to have a better idea of what Elon's role looks like if he's still there and what this administration is doing.
George,
Elon may be the loudest. Listen, it's clever for Dems to call him the shadow president. I'm not buying it, because both in the battle for who is going to be the next Senate Majority Leader, he lost. He was undermining Mike Johnson. He lost that. While he screwed up the first attempt at an appropriations deal, he didn't get everything he wanted. I think Elon is going to learn very quickly that governing is way different than campaigning or bloviating on Twitter, just like the squad. Everybody keeps talking about the squad as ruling the Democratic Party, except the squad doesn't even hold one committee chair. So being the loudest in Twitter or on social media doesn't mean being the most influential. I'd be looking at, I'd really think we have to pay attention to the Treasury Secretary, to the one, nobody's talking about this guy, but the director of the Office of Management and Budget, who actually comes out of Project 2025, which people were obsessed with for months, but now they've forgotten about it. Mm-hmm. And that guy's in charge. Those are the people who are going to be making decisions that actually affect your everyday life, whether services are going to get cut. They're the ones who are going to be putting together the budget, and nobody is talking about them. And this is one that I don't know whether it's because of Trump and Elon's genius, that they're like, look over here, where nothing that's really important is taking place. Right. I don't know if he did it on purpose, bringing up the grooming gate out of the UK while all the important decisions are being made over here.
Yeah. George, do you think that this diversion away from what's important is going to maybe, bite us in the behind as we move forward, on issues that we need to be really prepared about?
I think that at the end of the day, the American people, are all seeking the same thing. And circling back to how we started this segment, it comes down to incidents, safety, security. So I think that could last only so long. And then there's going to be another incident. And, we're talking about wildfires, but locally, if there's another big shooting, if there's something that happens, it's going to draw this attention that's going to force the administration to come back to those things that I think matter most. And, I think it's, there's going to be these moments where we're going to deviate, but I think, life and what goes on in our society is going to just bring us back to the core of the issues that we're talking about.
I agree with you. I agree with him, except for the example that he used. Unfortunately, and it's a stain, and history is going to remember us specifically for it. We never do anything about shootings. And given this political alignment, we still won't do anything about shootings. People who can be on a no-fly list can get a gun. It's clear that guns are not going to be banned. The Supreme Court has been clear about that. But we do nothing about shootings, and we will do nothing about shootings for the next 4 years.
I think this is a perfect time to bring in our shot clock theme, where we can hit each of you.
Bad pun, man. We were just talking about shootings, and you're like, shot clocks.
Apologies for that one, but we got our NBA shot clock.
People
are like, we've got 24 seconds on the clock for each of you, and essentially, what I want to take, and we can unfold a little bit afterwards. But if you can give us a name to the disaster film, since we've been talking about this theme, that you think would go with. That would really capture what we're seeing in just this first week of 2025. And George, I think I'll pass the ball to you first here. And if you do go over, we will call you out.
Multiple films, backdraft. Am I doing multiple films?
You can do as many as you want, but I think one.
Start them over. You gotta explain.
So backdraft. No, you don't start me over. So backdraft, right? It's about a fire that you got to respect. The fire, you got to live it. You got to let it breathe. You got to understand if it was placed, if it was man-made, its disaster and catastrophic effects, your ability to control it or not control it, and the impact it could have on human life and property.
Nice. Great timing. Chiampas is the one to beat now. Katerina, you're up. Which... we stole a few seconds from you, so let's get the clock running again from the top. And floor's yours.
I'm going to go with Armageddon. Pick a crazy one. Contagion. Do we have a pandemic 2.0 looming? And Geostorm from 2017. It's about tech controlling the climate.
All right. The 10 seconds we got extra don't piggyback over to you, Endy. So you're just stuck with the 24, but I think you can manage.
All right,
no distractions.
I'll go with London Has Fallen, all right, because the UK is still not recovered from Brexit, which I think has consequences for the West, for both Europe and the United States. And, because we see terrorist groups, ISIS is back and they could play such a role. And for a song, Nikiastike.
It didn't come out.
It did. I said Nikiastike. Sorry. For all you guys, just remember, May 29th.
Shot doesn't count.
2024. So the cosas sospiticelus Nikiastike.
For those of you who don't know, look it up. It's a reference to Olympiacos' famous win now in Hagia Sophia Stadium in the spring, bringing home the European Conference League championship. I say with as a Greek, we're proud of Greek teams doing well, but as a Panathinaikos fans, a little bit of a bitterness. It wasn't us to bring the first trophy back, but it's all right. And I'll wrap up. Title for a disaster movie on my end, I would say Inferno. We've got rising temperatures. We've got rising temperatures at sea and at land, obviously. Wildfires that we don't know how we're going to deal with. I mean, we're seeing them in January. We're expecting them again in Greece this summer, despite, some of the rain and the snow that we've seen. And everybody's posting their pictures from the mountainside skiing. It's a good sign, but can it last? And is it going to be as impactful as we think? And, on the political side, we've got a president-elect that's picking fights across the board.
There's no way you've done this in 24 seconds.
I get host privileges. Host privileges.
It ended at Inferno.
But Inferno would be my pick there. And with that, have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you on our next episode of the Greek Current Cafe.